All right, so welcome to our joint combination presentation. My name is Dr. Jody Polleck, and I'll be presenting with Dr. Anderson Smith, and we're going to be speaking with you today about book clubs in digital spaces. And Anderson's going to speak about what that looks like from an asynchronous space, and then I'll be speaking about the work through a synchronous space and talking about the difference between those two in our work with both adolescents and adults. I'm going to ask if we could start the timer. That would be helpful. Thank you. Great. Awesome. I got like a free extra 30 seconds to go. So I'll be talking to you for the first 10 minutes, and then Anderson's going to come up and speak to you. And then afterwards, he'll be talking about bibliotherapy, which really grounds the work that we're doing when we're thinking about book clubs in digital spaces. So let's start off with definitions. When we think about what is a synchronous versus asynchronous digital book club, I'll be speaking to synchronous spaces. So a synchronous digital book club is where readers can read a text together online in a digital space, or they can read it on their own, but when they're actually participating in the book club, it's in real time. So they're talking to each other, faces are all on screen, and they're able to engage in conversations about the shared text that they've read. As far as the research that grounds this work, Anderson and I have this study that we have been working on since 2019, 2020, but there has been some previous work around digital book clubs that have shown that digital book clubs tap into students' digital literacies, so we know that many of our students are digital natives, much better than some of the adults out there when it comes to digital spaces. But these spaces really allow students to interact from diverse spaces. So with my particular book clubs, I had students in the Netherlands talking with the students in the United States, and we wouldn't be able to do that without the digital book clubs. Digital book clubs also provide a really innovative and engaging context for rich conversations, which really helps to deepen students' comprehension and connection with text. They also allow young people to engage in critical literacies around issues of their identities and social justice. So we'll speak a lot about how the texts are used not only to help students develop their literacy skills, but also social emotional learning as well. So how can we help them to think about their own identity constructions, and then also think about larger issues that are happening around the world. And they also just allow for a space for young people to share their learnings, make connections to each other, and to understand diverse perspectives outside of that traditional classroom. And so our work is really grounded in three different areas, one of which Anderson's going to speak to more deeply. The first is culturally responsive and sustaining approaches, which means that we use the cultural identities and assets of the people participating in these to really ground the textual choices that we make and the instruction that we use. So we're thinking about their cultures and their intersectional identities as really complex, and we're using those to make decisions around how book clubs function. We also use reader response theory, which I'm not sure if Anderson is going to speak to too much, but basically it's where there's no one right meaning, right? We allow students to engage in text based on what their identities are. So the meaning is not in the text itself, the meaning is in the reader. And so that allows for a much more complex and integrative connection to the text. And then finally, the book clubs that we used were grounded in culturally affirming social emotional learning, which is really thinking about students' emotional and social development, but in ways that are culturally affirming, specifically looking at bibliotherapy, which Anderson will speak to in about 15 minutes. As far as the synchronous book clubs for this particular small study, there were 3 book clubs. They met once per week for an hour for 6 months during the pandemic. So, the pandemic shut schools down in the US, and so as educators, we needed to find spaces and ways that students could engage with each other and engage with the reading in authentic ways, because we were having a hard time of getting students to turn on their screens. We were having a hard time getting students to read books. So we used book clubs as a way for them to engage in these spaces. So there were 3 different book clubs. One was an international book club of students from both the Netherlands and the US. They were all all neurologically diverse students, students with autism, and students with attention deficit disorder were in this particular book club. We had a second one of all females who were emergent, bi, and multilingual learners. They were all recent immigrants to the U.S. from a variety of countries, Africa, South America, and the Caribbean. And then the third book club was all group of males, all identify as males, all emergent bi and multilingual learners, all Muslims, and again, also all recent immigrants from Africa, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And so these all met at different times, once a week for about an hour for 6 months. And in terms of how those book clubs, from a practical sense, they always began with a particular opening activity to help students build community, maybe not related to the text. They then summarized what they had read independently outside of book club, and then they had the opportunity for that reader response moment where they could have any sort of conversations about the reading that they did. And then we would take the time to actually read a chapter together, and then we would talk about that chapter that we just read. And then there was always a closing activity. And these opening and closing activities were really needed in the synchronous spaces in order to build community, because we wanted students to build trust with each other so they felt comfortable talking not just about the text, but the way the text could function as a catalyst for them to think about their own social and emotional development and their own connections with themselves. There is a website that I'll share with you towards the end of my part of this presentation, but this, for those of you who are interested in conducting book clubs, this is a template that really helps you to think about how to plan for them. So thinking about who are our students, where and when will those book clubs take place, what is the purpose of your book club? So if your students, for instance, most of our students were recent immigrants, so we read texts that centered the experiences of recent immigrants to the US. And those were important because they reflected and they provided mirrors into the students' identities. And then what are the great texts that you're going to choose to really engage them? And what we found was that there were dual purposes in the digital book clubs. There was an academic purpose and there was a social emotional purpose. So the book clubs were used to develop vocabulary, fluency, decoding, and comprehension, that reading that we were doing together. And then in the discussions, we were able to build their analytical skills and also build those discussion and communication skills, which is really important in building their English communications as well. And when they wanted to express themselves in their first languages, that was an important part of that space too. So they were often bilingual book clubs as well, so that students could engage at their point of access. In terms of social emotional development, we found that the book clubs really help students to build empathy. So thinking about what were the experiences of others, both in the characters and with other students in the book clubs. It helped to create community. It helped students to see multiple perspectives of a particular idea, and it helped them to build their sense of agency or advocacy. So we talked a lot about social justice issues. And so specifically what that looked like in the first book club, they all read a science fiction book called Scythe. And we found that in that space, students both developed their analysis, but also their sense of agency and advocacy. So a lot of the conversations were during the pandemic. So how do we get resources to low-resourced and low-funded areas? Because students were seeing very vast inequities within their communities. And so there's a lot of conversations about that and how that actually connected to the text that they were reading. The second book club, we really worked on some of the basic foundational reading skills, so reading aloud, helping to build students' fluency, summarization, inferences. But we also used book clubs to help build community. All of these young women were very new to the US, and during the pandemic, they were very isolated in these spaces and didn't have a lot of friends or family close by, so this space allowed them to build community and connection with one another. And then finally, with the third, very similar. These young men were very new to the US, and so they were able to work on their English speaking skills while also cultivating some self-awareness and identity development by reading a story about another Muslim young person. And so that really helped them to make connections and to think about their own religious identities and how those played out within the text themselves. And so we were really able to focus on two things. So you'll look and see that like you can talk both about summarizing and identity development. So the question would be, talk about Nyla's identity. Who is she? How does she fit in with her community and within the world of her Pakistani family? How does that play out in your own lives? So we're both summarizing, connecting, and also working on that social emotional learning. And so we have about a few seconds, and what I'm going to do, this kind of gives you a little bit of an overview. If you have more questions about the synchronous spaces, this is my email. You can also check out the website Educate for Action, which provides a lot of the practical strategies for how these function. And this is also a book called Facilitating Youth-Led Book Clubs that really outlines some of these ideas in details. So I'm going to ask Anderson to come up, and he's going to speak to what do these look like in asynchronous spaces.
Well, while they're pulling up my slides, maybe if you all had a question for Jody while they're pulling up my slides, then, you know,
they've already
go ahead.
got them up.
It's up. Great. Look at that. Efficiency. Since this is the World Literacy Summit, I'd like to begin my presentation with a story. And our journey is going to begin in 2004 when I received a letter from my little sister Tammy, who was incarcerated at Beacon Correctional Facility, a minimum security state prison for adult women, despite the fact that she had been a juvenile at the time of her incarceration. In her letter, Tammy shared with me the score that she had received on her GED, or her General Education Development test, which is in the United States is equivalent to a high school diploma. The passing score, she explained, was a 2250, and as you can see, she scored a 2840. Tammy's choice to focus on her educational development was among her first steps towards self-rehabilitation, and receiving her GED did position her for potential success in other areas of her life. But even though the high score had boosted her self-confidence, the exam had done very, very little to help her on the road to reacclimating to society, and even more importantly, it did very little to address the effects of post-incarcerated syndrome, or PICS, from her time spent in prison. The exiled Brazilian philosopher and educator Paulo Freire says that any situation in which some individuals prevent others from engaging in the process of inquiry is one of violence. The means used are not important. To alienate a human being from their own decision-making is to change them into objects. Now let's think about this. How much agency does a person have during their period of incarceration? None, right? Did you know that on average it takes more than 2 months for a new behavior to become automatic? 66 days to be exact. So imagine living under these conditions for 2 years. Imagine living under these conditions for 10 years, 30 years. The violence that Freire speaks of is the worst of all, violence against the mind. So it would seem that it doesn't only affect the individual, but it affects their children and their children and their children's children, unless if that cycle is broken. As I read Freire's quote, I'm reminded of the famous words often attributed to John Dewey, and it says that education is not preparation for life, education is life itself. So it's no surprise that currently in the United States, half the people with criminal conviction histories will return to prison within 5 years, and over 50% of people with criminal conviction histories have a mental health condition. PICS, or post-incarcerated syndrome, a form of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a significant risk factor for criminal recidivism. So in my study, I make the case that strengthening one's mental stability after existing in a punitive environment that provides little opportunity for self-rehabilitation from a condition created while being in that environment could be the key to reducing recidivism in the United States in the long term. So while my digital book club does not specifically remedy PICS, it was my hope that establishing a supportive community could create the initial dominoes to set everything else into motion. For not only my little sister Tammy, but for other thousands of men and women that are incarcerated across the globe. So for the remainder of my time, I'm going to cover a little bit of my background. I'm going to talk a little bit about our theoretical frame. I'm going to discuss my findings, implications as well. And as we engage with this process, I want you to consider, what do others have to gain from your humanity? So Dr. Rudine Bishop explains the various pathways to which a reader can experience literature as follows. She says that books are sometimes windows offering views of the world that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are often also sliding glass doors, and readers only have to walk through an imagination to become part of whatever worlds have been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we could see our own lives and experiences as part of a larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. Now, Paulo Freire would say that liberation is a praxis, the action and reflection upon the men and women, upon their worlds, in order to transform it. I focus on the word transform in Freire's quote, which makes me consider that inward transformation precedes outward change. Therefore, one would have to exemplify the transformation that they would like for their society. So, Freire would argue that transformation must therefore begin with the self. And I argue that books and community assist with that transformation. So I want you to take a moment and consider this question. What have books been for you in your life? And right here is where I would switch to my second half of my presentation, which is, I'll discuss. Good afternoon, or everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Dr. Anderson Smith, and perhaps you could tell from my accent, I'm from the Bronx, New York. I'm the assistant director for research compliance education at Columbia University. I also have taught in creative writing and spoken word poetry in both medium and maximum security prisons in the United States. And my research interests align with self-reflection and resilience that emerge through active participation in asynchronous digital book club communities. And my topic today is digital bibliotherapy, rehumanization from incarceration through an online book club. So the term bibliotherapy is an amalgam of the Greek words biblio and therapia, literally translating to the therapeutic value derived from books. And it's fitting that it has a Greek origin, since the Greek philosopher Aristotle used, building upon the work of Plato, used reading to heal his emotions. And another Greek philosopher, Celsus, used text to improve his ability to produce sound judgment. The use of bibliotherapy can be traced back to the United States in the late 1800s, when Dr. Benjamin Rush, a physician, used to prescribe Bible scriptures to his patients. And then the term was later coined by a popular essayist, Samuel Carruthers, in 1916. So, I'm going to explain this figure here. This is the relationship between my theoretical frame used in my asynchronous book club. So in the first instance, the transactional theory, when readers are engaging with text, they bring along what's called the designer luggage. So the reader's comprehension of a text is understood in the context of their life, leading to the reader's reflection and action in their life as indicated with the overlay of praxis. Continuing with the diagram, when readers are in dialogue with each other, as indicated with the arrows, a discussion can lead to additional perspectives and understanding to co-construct knowledge from text and action, as indicated with the areas of legitimate peripheral participation. So my study investigated self-reflection and resilience that emerges through active participation in digital book club communities. And to address my topic of inquiry, I adopted an exploratory qualitative research approach to look across the perspectives of men and women with criminal conviction histories on ways that a work of fiction can promote self-reflection and resilience necessary for self-rehabilitation, based on this question here. So in 2020, I conducted a study facilitating a digital book club community with 11 participants from 3 different time zones in the United States, all of whom had criminal conviction histories. And among the participants were 6 male, 5 female, between the ages of 25 and 54 years old. Race, ethnicity, and education levels were diverse among the participants, ranging from African American to white to Latinx. Now I'd like to introduce you all to some of my participants and give you some access to the privy conversations that we had around The Alchemist. And if you haven't had an opportunity to pick up a copy of The Alchemist, I definitely recommend it. And I'm not going to spoil it for you that haven't read it, but the protagonist, Santiago, his jacket resonated with all of the participants differently, and in many ways, they saw themselves and related it back to their experiences in prison. And as such, numerous comments led to the illustration of several themes that we'll discuss later in the presentation. Hopefully this plays. Oh, could I get the audio, please? Introduce yourself.
I was locked up in Ohio for 6 years for a alcohol-related drunk driving accident.
I was in prison with a lady that had shared a link, and I was able to get into this study, and I cannot wait.
I was in jail once. It wasn't a really dramatic, long period of time, but it definitely affected my life, and I'd like to start talking about it.
I've been down for probably like since I was 18, in and out.
I was incarcerated for too long anyway, anytime it's too long. For 4 years, I returned home, and I'm still working on my life, doing a number of things. Why I joined is former career was a professional teacher and a college professor. I love literature. Paul Coelho is particularly somebody I enjoy reading.
Welcome to the first post of our study. What does your shoes say about you? Or what would Santiago's jacket symbolize in your life and why?
My shoes say about me. Well, since I don't like wearing shoes anyway, I think they're restrictive. I am pretty much like a wanderer. I keep going. I don't like to be rooted down to one thing, and that's what shoes do for me. They root me down. They kind of lock me down so I can't move, or they prevent me from being free.
So along similar lines, I selected the following video from Freri Taylor because of how personally explicit she was about the role that shoes played in the various stages of her life. Now, remember, these people have been only with each other for about a week or so. So for them to develop this relationship,
All of this happened between sunrise and sunset. It's my.
I'll start it over. I was talking in the middle of it. There we go.
All of this happened between sunrise and sunset. It's probably my favorite line. And then him crying afterwards, thinking about how his life so dramatically changed so quickly. How many life changes have I gone through? Have you gone through? It reminds me a lot of shoes as I walk around and I look on the subway in New York. I feel like everyone cares about shoes here more. I don't know why. They say so much about yourself. Like I have, dominatrix boots, and I have high heels from when I was a sex worker, and I have tennis shoes for when I feel so fat that I go running even though I don't love it. I remember how shoes were really important to me in jail because either you had someone that had enough money to send you or loved you enough to send you that money to buy stuff extra, like get things that weren't issued by the state. And I just remember how much I used to feel inadequate because I didn't have the fanciest shoes or the fanciest brands, and now I just don't care. I like go and buy shoes at Goodwill because I'm a wanderer, and if anything I know about Santiago's jacket is that we have to use the tools we have while we have them and not be attached and let them go when we need to use something else. So Happy New Year, y'all.
All right, so Dino also made a connection between his incarceration experience and the jacket. However, unlike the other participants who you've heard from already, Dino, the jacket represented something different. It represented security. And I want you to pay particular close attention to his usage of we, you, and us.
I did talk about people can't recognize where we've been unless they walked in our shoes, so I guess vice versa. The jacket, this is what I talk about. He's young, he's a little immature, but he's kind of strategic. And while we were in prison, we needed to be that way. We repurposed, redefined something in new ways constantly. I mean, I remember cardboard. Cardboard became the greatest thing in prison to me. I mean, I don't know how many different ways I used it.
So not only does Dino's comments highlight metacognition as he reflects on his past survival strategies, but it also demonstrates a level of resilience that he had in prison, right? It's particularly interesting that Dino used we, which suggests that he believed that everyone in the group had the same situations as he did. So I started to look for instances where other participants were using we, you, and us, and what I found interesting is that while none of the participants knew each other outside of this study, they all seemed to identify with one another. So I established that we, you, and us were synonymous in some cases with the singular I, but it could also be understood to quite literally mean the collective we. This adds a layer signifying the co-construction of knowledge and the establishment of community through language, but also shared experience of being formerly incarcerated. And I'm gonna play this video just so you can see that connection a little bit clearer. In this thread, you know, we're gonna take a closer look at the protagonist getting scammed and just another opportunity to show you how community is being developed through the bond of a life-changing event, which they all seem to have.
And then there's a couple things that hit me from the text. I thought about how he got conned by the guy, and the line that he said is the cafe owner was like, he thought the guy was angry and trying to block him, and he was like, I didn't want to miss out on an opportunity. And I was like, yo, how many times did I get scammed because I didn't want to miss out on an opportunity to either, you know, get noticed or like be popular?
Santiago getting scammed. Now that really just kind of stood out to me. I'm glad you touched on it, because how many times are we in places or situations where we don't fully understand the language, whether it be in writing, whether it be physical or actual language, that barrier that stands in between, you know, us and something, and we end up on the short end. It makes you wonder if we ignored the things around us or the red flags that were put up, you know, to say, hey, hold up, wait a minute. You know, I know for me, I've ignored a lot of red flags.
And I had a similar situation when I first got locked up, where somebody that I thought was trying to be my buddy really wasn't, and somebody else, was a complete stranger too, was trying to look out for me. So you never know who's good and who's bad, and he might even tell you, you know, there's thieves in every port, be careful. But
you know, Santiago is resilient, you know, and that's what I feel about the story has in common with us, is that to survive, we have to become adaptable in where we were, and pretty much I think all of us who made it out, even though I feel like I'm still broken, inside I definitely worked it out.
It's important also for me to note that this was all happening asynchronously through Flipgrid. That was the platform that I used. I'll talk a little bit about it. All right, so I gathered the data from 11 of my participants through the online surveys, phone interviews. We had asynchronous Flipgrid discussions. I did follow-up conversations with them, and then we had one synchronous focus group at the end of the study. Then I inductively coded all of the data through in vivo 12, overlapping the coded text to ensure that one segment of the text wasn't represented in another category, and I then refined the categories and began looking for instances where the categories fit my theoretical frame. And from there, I was able to make sense of this diagram and what happens truly when all are working together. And what I discovered were 4 thematic elements: metacognition, agency, community, and increased self-esteem. Now, this table illustrates the 4 thematic elements found in my dialogue and the codes that I used in vivo 12 that I associated with them. Now, this image, it illustrates the overlay of the themes where they align with my theoretical frames. Now, observed through a transactional lens, which is over here, when participants have an opportunity to evaluate their thoughts and make metacognitive contributions to each other in a situated learning environment, this leads to the development of supportive community that not only increases the self-esteem of each participant through the validation of their unique contributions, but also has enabled the participants to reflect and consider outside perspectives as they exist outside of a digital space in the real world, invoking a mental praxis that is necessary to affirm that they too have a purpose in life, not as objects, but as human beings. So the findings of my study suggest that self-reflection and resilience are not fixed. Rather, the development of these characteristics is ongoing and emergent through online literacy practices and digital community. My study was about people reimagining themselves as something more than just a person with a criminal conviction history. So as I close, and I echo the immortal words of Maya Angelou, I've learned that people will forget what you have said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So whether you're a writer, a reader, free or incarcerated, male, female, I've grown that we all carry this designer luggage with us. And by designer luggage, I mean who we are, our past, our present, right? Our age, race, religion, and culture. These are all the things that we bring to text, right? And we all have a story to tell. So I think I'm going to end with one of my study participants that does an amazing job at summing up their experience during our synchronous discussion.
Go ahead. Yeah, real quick, I just want to thank everybody because it's a combination of the book and just the whole process. And I'm about to put on my smart hat. Check it out. Now, I feel like it's empowering, you know what I'm saying? And it reaffirms our self-worth, you know? I had to write it down because I'm like, what is that, I wrote it down and that's, it is empowering. It's empowering, the whole process. And what I mean by like reaffirming your self-worth, like what I was saying earlier, because I didn't never think that I could do something like this, It's like we just, I guess, reached the milestone. We did something we never did. And doing this whole group setting, a lot of us, whether we know it or not, we're doing for each other. We're helping each other out.
Yeah.
In different ways. It's powerful. It's powerful. And I think that the people that's in jail will probably, they definitely benefit from it too. Out here, it's hard because, out here, I'm still on parole. I just came home September 11th. So it was kind of exciting to do this because I wanted to play like I'm in college or whatever. I said I'm really doing some, whatever project, whatever this is, and I'm juggling this right here with my work, with reporting to parole, going to the doctor, seeing my family. So it's kind of like a challenge. I challenged myself, and we made it. We're here. It's kind of like we reached the final exam.
That's right. That's right.
That is right. This is my contact details. For those that would like to reach out to me and learn more. Obviously, with a 20-minute presentation, I can't really cover all the various nuances with this, but this was an incredible experience for me, an incredible study, and 100% digital. And I actually flew Kindles out to all of the various participants in the various time zones. So I do have time. I have 3 minutes left for some questions. I'm happy to answer any question that you all may have on this. And again, I do realize that this is only 20 minutes. So, yes, hi.